end. So I should begin by acknowledging that we're meeting today on Dark and Young country, unceded land of Dark and Young people, and I want to pay my respects to elders past and present and acknowledge their continuing connection to country and their enduring culture. So yes, this is the first of the College of Human Social Futures research seminars at Ourimbah. And it's great to have a couple of people in person, and it's good to be able to run it as a hybrid thing as well. So I want it to be location based as a space for HDRs on this campus and staff obviously on this campus from the different schools in the college, but also as a way for us to be able to connect more broadly across the college and the various different disciplines we all work in that all I think align well, and in a way we can really listen to each other's research and be connected. So I wanted to, go first in this seminar to share some very preliminary findings from my the discovery project that I'm leading called Understanding Youth Selfie-editing Practices in Youth Visual Digital Cultures. So I've got a PowerPoint. I've been doing my initial, very initial data analysis ahead of the TASA conference, the Australian Sociological Association conference, that is coming up in about a month's time. So I'll share my screen and share some findings. This is the first time I've really spoken at all about the project. So it's exciting, and there's a lot going on with the findings. So, and I haven't sort of had a chance to be able to fully grapple with what they mean yet, but just getting a first go at what some of these things might mean and in connection with at least what the project set out to do. So you can see my screen okay? Sorry for everyone else that's meant to be up there. I'll just make this small so everyone here can see my screen a bit more. The broader team, Amy Dobson, Akane Kanai, Ros Gill, Neve White and Kia Hawker, who are the research assistants. So as a background, this project explores selfies as a social phenomena. So as a youth studies researcher, I'm concerned with the ways, or to, I guess, unpack some of the ways that young people's practices, whatever they are in the world, are often dismissed as frivolous, self-absorbed, or couched in pathologizing terms. And that's certainly true for selfies. That's usually taken as one of the examples of young people just being completely self-absorbed and overly digitally connected and, you know, out of touch with the real world, living their life through a screen, all the moral panics around screens. And it often coheres around eating, sort of eating disorder, sort of links, which is a link. It is true that there are connections between severe body image concerns and mental health issues. There is a real concern there, but usually the young people are sort of doubly disadvantaged by that, because it means that they're at once sort of held as responsible for being frivolous and self-absorbed, and as sort of being victims of their own making, which of course is critical scholars in whatever disciplines we're in, we would have a lot to say that would trouble that, and to create different, much richer understandings to see what's actually going on here. So the main premise of the project is that selfie editing is a new or newer aspect of youth visual digital cultures in the apps that are available to do that kind of editing. They can often include really dramatic alterations to the self and body that mimic cosmetic surgery procedures. You can structurally alter the body and face, change jaw lines, physical proportions, but there are also a range of other filters that are seen as being much more playful, like, you know, Snapchat filters that have all kinds of different animations built in, and gender swap tools. There's just so much going on here in the realm of AI and physical presentation that very much connects to existing cultural norms, which we know, of course, inform the body concerns, which are a real issue and concern for young people themselves. But no one has asked young people until this project anyway, how they actually understand these tools and filters, how they navigate them, how they encounter them, and what they do with them in their everyday lives. So this, in the last just month or so, I've been going through the interviews to see what they say about it. And of course, they say a lot. The apps and the tools themselves have really different and varying outcomes, I guess, in terms of how much or I guess how severe the implications can be for body image, and how others have a range of meanings that are much more related to just socialities, ways of communication between young people, humor and irony, fun, but also there is a really pernicious underside that is very, well, it's not really an underside, it's very obvious in the interviews. So we try to look at the ways that gender and racialized norms are built in and encountered and negotiated, and the ways that young people sort of have to learn to read images and to read images of themselves. It's just part of the landscape now that learning how to encounter them is just a part of youth everyday life. So really trying to centre their voices and centre their perspectives and their own practices and understandings as being valid and worthy of study, rather than sort of dismissing them as frivolous or, telling them to just get off the phone. It's not going to work. So it's really trying to take it seriously from young people themselves. So I'm using feminist theories of embodiment and affect to understand this embodied practice of not only selfie taking, but selfie editing, to try to have a framework to go beyond the sort of objectification framings of poor body image, which is just that, that is held that poor body image is basically just the result of internalizing ideas through passively consuming media images, where all of the research I've done so far and lots of other youth and feminist scholars speak about how it's an active process where you encounter images and they don't just have a one-way impact on you. They have many different possible impacts, depending on the day, depending on a range of different social and structural mediating factors. So the theory that I'm trying to use here is to understand that processes of body image are part of a larger, broader question of embodiment, and the way that that's formed, through the dynamic circumstances of everyday life. And I want to really centre the relational and affective pushes and pulls around images, identities, socio-cultural dynamics, which orient embodiment and identity, because certainly selfies, we know just probably from our own lives that selfies are very much an identity practice, but they're also very embodied and relational. So the questions are around understanding how people use and understand selfie editing apps, to explore the relationship between their practices and how they experience the self and body, to think about how young people understand and navigate the cultural norms that they encounter through these apps, because the gendered and racialized filters and editing tools that come within these apps just have the sociocultural norms baked into them. They tell you what you should look like. They tell you what, if you want to be pretty in quotes, you just press a button and it tells you what your face should look like if it's going to be read in that way. So there's a whole lot of, I guess, automated features within these apps, which are much more prescriptive than I think we're used to dealing with as sociologists. There isn't actually a lot of room for reading these things differently or alternatively. They're pretty blunt instruments in terms of reproducing or visualizing cultural and social norms in terms of reproduction and reproducing those norms. So understanding how people navigate them, of course, is the question. They won't always be read in that way that they're intended to be, but they're certainly communicating in very clear ways there. So the first year, which we've just kind of completing, we did photo elicitation interviews with 33 young people aged 18 to 24 who take selfies and use editing apps. Not all of the people who volunteered did use editing apps, but they could all speak to them. And I mean, it was probably like 29 out of the 33 would use the editing tools in some way or another. But there was a really big contrast between those who use, say, Snapchat to talk to their friends, to communicate, versus those who used the really intensive Photoshop type tools to dramatically change the self and face. So not all editing is equal. It's a very diverse practice that falls in, like a lot falls under photo editing. So that's going to be one of the things to really pull apart for us going forward in the project. So roughly half from the Central Coast Newcastle area and Melbourne. In terms of gender, it was predominantly female or cis woman identifying people, 24 of identified that way. And we had 5 who were non-binary, gender fluid or questioning, and 4 who identified as male or cis man, and they were able to self-identify on an e-form before they participated. So they kind of had a lot of freedom to identify in that way. Similarly, with cultural background, they had sort of open text responses available there. So predominantly white or Caucasian or Australian, which made up over half of the participants. Quite high Chinese cultural background and Asian or South Asian, from not just from Melbourne, but also from the Central Coast and Newcastle areas, and then a range of other backgrounds. Notably, there weren't any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander identifying people, which is something I think we will need to look at as we're going forward, because that doesn't mirror the kind of demographics of this area or Newcastle. So I think that's important to, I guess, realise that that's missing. And there were a range of class backgrounds. We don't have a clear way of kind of speaking about this yet, but there, in terms of sort of the professions that their parents had, there was a range of different backgrounds, from professional, like, you know, white collar, legal kind of teacher professions, and others, parents worked in the mines or in different trades. And there were quite a few who spoke about struggling with poverty and instability during their youth or their childhood, because these people were really young. Majority were 18 to 20. So the key themes that we're sort of beginning our analysis with are obviously the ones that I guess oriented the project to begin with, around the introduction I gave you around identity, gender and racialized kind of norms, and literacies. So I'm just kind of going to jump into data now, which is sort of the nice thing about being early on in the analysis, is you just have lots to talk about and to share. And yeah, I want this to only go for about half an hour all up, so we've got lots of time to talk at the end. So I'm going to kind of race through it and we can see how we go talking about it at the end. So in terms of trying to say some broad things about what people are, I don't know, how they're situating selfies and editing as an identity practice. I've been realizing that we can't separate, I guess, the processes or the practice of selfie editing. Selfies themselves are, you know, the practice of taking them, whether you edit them or not, are almost as important for understanding what's going on here as the editing. Some of the language is really the same, and the editing that then can go on with selfies is sort of so normalized that it's kind of not a qualitatively different thing to do. The qualitatively different things are actually the tools themselves, rather than if it's edited or not. So young people talk about how selfies and taking and sharing images of yourself is just really a way for young people to say, I exist in this world, I'm here. That's a quote from Nara. It's just kind of a price of entry being a young person. If you want to be digitally connected, it's imaging yourself and taking photos. It's just one of the most baselines dimensions of sociality for young people, and that in of itself is, of course, not a bad thing. There's nothing about taking selfies that's bad in of itself. It is a mode of communication. It's a way of connection. It's a way of sharing how you feel with your close friends in a closed kind of chat in a similar way as you would face to face. There's just a lot of other dimensions that can extend from that. So it's also a way of looking cool and sharing that you like the way you look. So as Lucy said, you know, we took these photos, we thought, hey, our makeup looks cool, we should probably take a photo before we eat. So just that kind of normalized thing of sharing moments through everyday life, of being with people and sharing that. And this is really connected to all the youth studies literature on selfie-editing and the selfie-taking practices as a youth digital cultural practice. So this stuff isn't new, but I think it's kind of good to establish that kind of grounding for what's going on in this project as well. Others talk about how taking selfies doesn't feel right to them. They don't want to do it. They think it feels uncomfortable, it feels strange, because I think they don't want to be associated with those kinds of stereotypes of youth as narcissistic. They seem kind of quite unwilling or not wanting to connect their own identities with that kind of form of self-presentation. And Owen said he would only take a selfie to be really ironic, and he would only share it with his friends, be like, hey, look, I'm looking fire today, and sort of doing it really ironically and sort of in a way that pokes fun at that, I guess, Instagram stereotype of the beautified, perfected body. And Paige talked about how taking a selfie for however she was feeling would be a way to start a conversation with a close friend. So again, selfies in that closed environment of Snapchat, where it's just a one-to-one private conversation with a friend, is a completely different practice, really. Even though the practice of taking a photo of your face is the same, what it means is so different when it's being used to just communicate privately. She said she would often take a photo of herself crying and send it to a friend because she wanted to start a conversation with her friend to talk about how she felt, but she would never post that photo on Instagram. So she talked about how there is two types of selfies here. So quote, there's almost two types of selfies, and it's either to communicate with a friend or communicate with people via Snapchat in that realm, or it's to post online to show where you are, to who you're with. You want to make sure people know you look good or know you're feeling good. So just talking about the really different distinctions between presenting an ideal life versus having a kind of deep connection with someone where you're going to be much more vulnerable. Jared talked about how his Instagram was about basically him showing him doing stuff out and about. All pictures of me at the beach having a drink. They're all a picturesque picture of my social life. And he described how he'd position his body for a photo like that. He'd stand there, put my shoulder blades together, chest up. So there's kind of masculinity dimensions there that are going on with the embodied dimensions of identity, and not just who you are identity, but trying to really curate a version of yourself. And all young people in the study have sort of identified that as being something, whether they do or not, it's certainly the common association or meanings of taking and sharing selfies in the public domain like Instagram. And that background of sharing and presenting an ideal life is the kind of, I think, gets us more into the meanings of body image, those sorts of pressures around presenting an ideal life that then go along with a certain kind of selfie-editing, which align with trying to portray this more. So it's not selfie-editing in of itself, it's this part of it that has a different range of associations and meanings. The forensic gaze is a concept that Ros Gill has been using over the past 10 years or so, developing in her work, and we're really fortunate to have her as a partner investigator in this project, because we're certainly finding a lot of evidence to support the idea here that one of the main ways that young people read and see themselves in social media is that they've developed a very forensic gaze to look at and assess, judge other people's bodies and identities and how value is accorded in these contexts, in particularly gendered and racialized ways. So many participants had just the most forensic language for analysing their body and self. And as someone who's been working in this area, I guess, for over 10 years since I graduated from my PhD this year, in fact, it's almost to the month, to the date, I just realised this is new for me. This is new to me to see this level of scrutiny. And I've been asking people similar questions. But maybe there's something specific about asking the editing questions that gets into the very practical, technical dimensions of how the self is not only viewed, but modified, edited through the image in this way. So, Abigail, who I interviewed, and was, I think, this transcript, trying to work with what Abigail told me will keep me busy for, I think, about a year. It was one of those really incredibly rich, very detailed interview where it connects with so many concepts and so many themes that we're interested in, and she expressed it so incredibly lucidly. So she talks about, if I'm going to post this photo, does it look good? Does my hair look good? Does my face look good? Is my skin okay? Is the angle of my face okay? And then there's always like, that's not even the actual editing. Well, there's the editing factor, but I'm trying to get away from using so much. She was sort of there's so much tension around how she was positioning herself or understanding herself and wanting to not edit anymore because she felt it was kind of sucked her into, in a kind of Deleuzian or affective language. It's this really close, intensive affective relation, which was sort of like a cycle or a loop that was really hard to break out of. So, you know, there's filters like the light and the color and highlights and what you have and what have you that you post to make it look a certain way before you post it on social media. It's like there isn't an actual criteria, but it's like a criteria would go through my head when I take a picture. Like, is this not even, do I like this post? Do I want to post this photo? But is it an acceptable post? Is this photo acceptable to post? And I realized this is the way my mind works, which I realized isn't healthy. So like I said, there's so many different discourses and affective dimensions to this example where she describes the image reading practices that she brings to her own images in relation to others that she sees. She's wanting to position her photos in this realm of ideal femininity, and her photos and her friends, you know, they are influences. They embody the very saleable image of physical femininity, which, you know, has clothes designers contacting them to sell their products. Her friends and her have all had cosmetic surgery. She's 21. But, you know, she says this is the way her mind works, you know, this individualized relation where she's solely responsible for having to manage how she, I guess, orients herself within this landscape of incredibly pernicious body image cultures. And that's, I guess, what it looks like to have a forensic gaze in that landscape. In these examples, it's, I guess, more broadly speaking about how young people sort of speak about selfies to try to capture some kind of transient feeling that they want to then present. So Lucy talks about wanting to capture a moment in her life or a feeling, how she's feeling in this moment, and that connects to some earlier research I'd done around the capacity of images in a photo voice project to connect to some sort of presentness that I think a lot of young people talk about. That's what they like about selfies, and a way of, I guess, creating identity through these momentary feelings and images that are then communicated to show others. And Paige talks about this sort of transience in images as she wouldn't take, instead of taking selfies and trying to choose from a range of them to post, she would take videos of herself and she would pause it in frame by frame until she found the perfect photo. And she was saying, there's section moments that I think looks pretty good. You might just scroll through and go, oh, that one's pretty good, take a screenshot. So I'll keep going through. You're less looking for, it's like you're going through a selection of paint colors and you finally find the one you like, or finally find one that's going to match your wall, to match your image online. You find that one and go, yeah, that's going to match exactly what I'm looking to put out online. And I was really blown away by how sort of fleeting that is, that, and connecting with the forensic gaze as well, that you can pinpoint the precise second in a photo or video of your face that you're like, that's it. And then it connects as well to how other participants talked about how it was so difficult to present the ideal self online because of how transient it was. It was really difficult to capture a photo that they thought looked good enough to post, and that meant that they would often internalize negative kind of body comments on that because they were feeling like they were looking good, but they just couldn't get the photo that they thought looked good enough. And it's just this really kind of micro level of attention and detail to the self and through the image as being, I think, kind of much more intensive than I was expecting to find. This, I think, is a really good example as well. I guess the last couple of examples I've been trying to think through affect in how these kind of momentary, transitory sorts of states are able to be captured for a second, maybe in a photo that connect with how the self is experienced and lived. And I think Jenna put it really well here. She talks about how good feelings radiate through the photo, and she takes a selfie because the moment of taking it, she felt like she looked great, and that's why she got the phone out to take the photo. And then she looked how she expected to in the photo, and then for weeks afterwards she looks at it and it's made her feel happy, sort of in this ongoing way, which I guess is another way of understanding the power of images here. Not just you know, if something has the capacity to make you feel good for so long afterwards, you can understand the pull and reason that people would want to engage in this, right? This is her absolute favorite selfie. I've just got my hair cut. I feel like $1 million, and it's just that I look genuinely happy in it. And there's a lot here that we will go on to talk about, you know, as a team analysis here around the ways that images here, I think, and the broader landscape of femininity and affects relate to a very, you know, what is a valuable self, what images are valuable, looking like $1 million. There is a really specific set of ideals working here, which enable these good feelings to be felt, you know. Abigail, Jenna, many others here, you know, they're absolutely embodying visibly the range of, or a very narrow range of ideal femininity, which is around slim, white, able-bodied, conventionally attractive femininity. I'm not going to be able to go through all my slides. I'll have to start choosing a couple last ones. This example from Ivy, this is sort of more about the editing practices now, and her example I think is quite neat because it talks about I guess a range of different capacities that different editing features have. So many of the young people talked about using particular filters or tools to get rid of acne or get rid of braces or to smooth skin, which are, you know, can be considered quite sort of youthful appearance type things that is specific to, or they certainly understand as being like, oh, you know, this will end, you know, once my skin clears up when I get a bit older, you know, so it was sort of linked very much to youthfulness. Whereas others are around more structural changes and Photoshop-like editing techniques, like, so Ivy says, there was lipstick on my teeth, I got rid of that. I think I had a few pimples as well, so I blurred them out. What else? Changed the saturation, so the light. I have freckles and stuff on my arms. I probably would have got rid of them. She can't even really remember. She's so used to doing it that when she's looking at the photo, she's like, I would have done that. You know, it's such a normalized sort of thing that it doesn't kind of bear speaking about. So I made my arm a tiny bit more skinnier, and I just fixed my lipstick. That would probably be most of it. So, and in this image, even though I've kind of changed it so it's not, you can't actually see the editing tools, which is one of the kind of necessary things you have to do to keep an anonymity. But these and so many of the photos, I couldn't tell, no one could really tell, that you wouldn't be able to know that they'd been edited. That was part of the technique and the, part of, I guess, the expertise in this is that they're edited in a way that it just looks sort of slightly perfected, but not at all in a way that would be recognizable. Structural editing and body ideals were seen by participants as being the more risky practices, in terms of risky, of like dangerous, you might get addicted to it. That was the participants used that kind of language of pathology. But in the affective practice type of way, it was more just they felt like they would be getting into something that they wouldn't easily be able to stop doing. Is a more, I guess, specific way of explaining what's going on. So Riley was saying, I can see how it would be harmful for people my age, because they might want to completely change themselves and completely base their identity on how they look and how they're presented, on their own self-worth. And to an extent we all do, but I can see how it would be taken too far if you're not careful. So it would mainly be that this got into more dangerous body image territory, I think. So it would be more that they're identifying that this would create a very pernicious forensic gaze that might make it much harder actually to inhabit a body that doesn't look like the edited body. But as Abigail and Freya and some other participants did have cosmetic surgery to look like the edited selfies, and I wasn't really expecting to find that in such a small sample. Lucy, I guess, just a tiny bit more on that point around why it can be seen as a dangerous thing to do structural edits, which is when you change, you might change the shape of your waist or change your shoulders or whatever dimensions that you don't like. Lucy said if you start spiraling, you won't be able to stop, and she talks about how it's a slippery slope. And to me, all of this language is very affective, and is sort of really getting to the crux of this as a practice that I'm not obviously viewing in moralized terms, but trying to understand the affective relation and what it mediates in terms of what they're able to do or not do as a result. There was some really interesting stuff about gender and racialized filters, how difficult it was for some of the Chinese or Thai Vietnamese people in the study. Often the filters would look wrong on them. Their faces their features were just they're absolutely not designed for them. And it made her, Grace talks about how the fox eye trend makes her eyes look very aggressive. Participants are good at reading the racialized aspects of filters in particular. The gendered ones are a little bit more fly under the radar a bit more, in terms of they will notice that some filters just automatically smooth skin and brighten features, but it's a bit harder to kind of pinpoint what is being, the way the gendered aspects are baked in and just applied. It's, I don't know, it's a bit more, that's the right word. It's not ambivalent, but yeah, it's subtle, I guess. It's harder to pinpoint. I'm just going to skip through to yeah, I mean, you're kind of getting my whole project, so I can't go through all of it. I think I might finish on this one. This is Freya. She talked about, this is something I really want to look at more. I think there's definitely a paper in this about how the interface of the phone screen, or the image on the phone, presents, something about that, the way that image is mediated, not just through the phone, but through being able to use your fingers to edit. You can swipe particular things on your face, or you can, use the cropping features or the editing features to change the face of your nose or your jaw. You're used to seeing your face through that mediated screen image. So then you kind of carry that machine vision around for how you see yourself in every surface, whether it's a mirror or anytime you see your face with the capacities attached through the, yeah, you can imagine like the icons coming up. And she talks, this is what Freya says here. Ever since I started editing my body in photos when I was younger, I would look in the mirror, especially when I've just hopped out of the shower, and I'd grab my stomach and be like, wouldn't it be great if I could just cinch it, flatten it? It's the way I think about it. It's definitely every single day. Like, I will look in the mirror and be like, what if I could just, lift my face? And she was doing this. I would imagine it happening as something on a screen. It definitely affects the way I think about my insecurities, because I could so easily, if I was on a screen, I could just rub out the stretch marks, or I could just cinch in the waist, things like that. And this kind of, I guess, mediated technological capacity that is being spoken about here is something that Rosgill wrote about probably about 5 years ago, where they were trying to, I guess, think through what some of the capacities or changes to subjectivity that might result from the editing tools in these apps. And she was sort of suspecting that this might be the outcome, not from a psychologized perspective where you can have body dissatisfaction or likelihood of having cosmetic surgery on some Likert scale, which is how most of the psych studies do it, but to actually the embodied self being mediated through these capacities is something that the study is finding. So I'll just finish with this last slide. This is, I called it conclusion originally, but it's not by any means a conclusion. It's a summary of the findings I've talked about that I'm really currently thinking through just every day at the moment. So selfie-editing is certainly an embodied relational practice, which we set out to explore it in those dimensions. And I think the ways that young people are speaking about it are opening up new ways of understanding, I think, identity through selfie-editing and self-mediation, really. It's not really selfie, it's self-mediation, mediation of the self through images. And of course, this intersects with gendered, racialized and youthful ideals. They're having to navigate those, I guess, broader cultural meanings of selfie-editing and young people more generally as being, as being some kind of a narcissistic thing to do, at the same way as it being totally central in their lives and the way of being known and seen and valued by their friends, by society. The social pressures to present not just an ideal self and body, but an ideal life are really full on. I can't think of any other way to say it at the moment. It's really intense. And it's not really anything you can escape from unless you just want to completely, disconnect from popular culture or youthful culture. Like, if you in any way want to embody the ideals of youthfulness that are valued, then you can't really, there's no way around this. I didn't get into this, but there were lots of, most of the participants had some kind of language for talking about how they were trying to be protective around body image for themselves and trying to have positive orientations to self. But always you can see how difficult that space is to tread, how hard that line is. But that's certainly going to be an avenue going forward, particularly around, obviously, young women were the primary ones who volunteered to take part in the study. We tried to target other groups through the advertising, but obviously selfie-editing and selfies are coded as a more feminine related thing to do in terms of normalized practices. And I think I'm speculating, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to be considering editing practices as a form of bodywork. I think I'm going to try to loop back to my work 10 years ago, because bodywork can be considered like editing, right? It's practices that are around modifying the embodied self, and editing kind of creates a whole new world for that, which is mediated through the screen. So I think, yeah, there's certainly questions for trying to understand what how the embodied self can be lived in a more free or less constrained way. I don't know how that will be done, but there are certainly some clues from participants. And next year we'll be doing some selfie editing workshops with young people. So hopefully, I mean, it's going to be interesting in practice to see how this goes, but we're going to be trying to have as many of the same participants as we can in those workshops, to try to, I guess, build on what we already have with them, because I feel like we've kind of got existing relationships with these young people now, and I think maybe we'll invite them each to bring a friend, might be the way to do it. But you know what it's like trying to have a longitudinal study. Even if we get half of them back, I think it would be a win, but that could be ambitious. So anyway, I'll leave it there. Thanks for listening. So yeah, you just got like an insight into my inner world for the last month or so, and you just kind of got it all like blurred at you. So hopefully it made some kind of sense.
Yeah.
It was great. Thank you.
Thanks, Julia.
I was just saying, thank you for the presentation, but I have a question as well. I thought it was really interesting that there's like a kind of ethic of the self, or sorry, kind of, I suppose, self-ethic in terms of like self-care and trying to like protect oneself and trying to like impose kind of limits. And it seems like there's some kind of recognition of the potential for harm. But I'm wondering, does that, like, without being moralizing, I'm not saying that it should, but does that ever extend to other people? Is there a sense of like curtailing one's own practices to not be like putting things online that would be damaging, or feeding into things that are like feeding into this kind of perceived harm that seems to be like at the kind of extremities of this practice?
Yeah, there are definitely a couple of participants who said that they, there was a slide I skipped over where they were saying they did structural editing once, and they posted those photos and they felt so guilty about it that they deleted them immediately or the next day, and have now got a hard line that they will never ever do that again.
That's really interesting. So the guilt was like, was the guilt around how it would impact others, or was it around some kind of sense of inauthenticity?
I think it was sort of a sense of both of those things, but kind of being disappointed in herself.
Yeah.
Doing that. So again, like highly moralizing and highly kind of moralizing on the self. But yeah, I think more broadly though, there was this interesting sort of narrative around not wanting to judge other people for what they were doing, that kind of whole like, oh, I don't judge, people want to do whatever they want to do, you do you, like that whole kind of very, I don't know what we'd call that kind of discourse. But I felt like there was something, I don't know, unwilling to judge other people for their own practices, but at the same time there was a lot of judgment going on for being inauthentic.
That's really interesting. It seems like an area with lots of tension and kind of a different standard for the self versus others.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of, maybe it's a popular culture kind of discourse of maybe like almost like a liberal feminist kind of thing. It's like, oh, if people don't, people can do whatever they want, everything's fine by me. It's sort of like that kind of, I don't know. Is it neoliberal? I'm not sure. I'm sure my team will be able to help me think through this. I haven't had a meeting with them properly about the analysis. It's a good thing about that. But yeah, I agree. It's an interesting tension, Julia. Yeah, thanks, Nancy. You had your hand up.
Thanks so much for sharing that early research, and it is just a fascinating area. And I'd also like to particularly compliment you on communicating effectively to a broader audience. I've been to some sociology papers in the past where I've thought, I don't know what you're talking about, but I think that you have done a great job. And I think sociology has actually changed in the last 10 or 15 years too, to be a bit more accessible to people outside. And I was wondering about, you're just talking about that idea of being accepting of what other people might do in their own self-editing practices, but are they judging themselves against the edited versions of other people, or does that awareness filter through to, I know she doesn't really look like that, her arms aren't that skinny, so do I need to make my arms a bit more skinny, whatever the thing is.
They talked about being aware of the fact that the standard is shifting because everybody is editing, or particularly celebrity culture. They know that those images are edited. They know that they're photoshopped. They know they're perfected, but it still doesn't mean that that's not the norm or the accepted standard. And that was kind of the language that Abigail used. She was the one who talked about wanting to, edit herself in the mirror. She was saying that she felt like just what it took to be just baseline acceptable, not just in terms of her physical presentation, but her whole self was only like, that's the thing, the body appearance self get conflated. They get just all like mashed in together when there's really negative or body image pressures going on, or particularly intensive concerns. So yeah, that's the thing. One of the main, I think, areas we're going to have to deal with at the latter end of the project is, we're talking about literacies with young people and body image and things like that. People are very literate. It's not that they don't know how to read images. It's not that they don't know that images are edited and that they're unrealistic. They know it. So what do we do? I don't know.
Yeah, I'll look forward to what you come up with.
Yeah, I would say stay tuned, but I'm not sure it's going to, maybe there won't be any answers. But I mean, I was talking to Amy, one of the other researchers, on Friday, just having one of those kind of big waffly, like personal analytic research conversations that sometimes are fortunate to have with a team. And they were talking about a book around trying to link in, I guess, critical psychological perspectives back, kind of trying to move beyond Foucault and biopedagogies to see the ways that the kinds of these, I guess, same questions around pathologizing or normalizing pathologizing language and normalizing literacies even as a thing, that if we just teach people to be literate, then the problems will be solved. It's kind of can be seen as part of the same move towards approaching, or everyone approaching themselves and self-diagnosing and kind of living the psychologized self. I think that I feel like that's going on in this project, linking to what you were saying, Julia.
It's also such a red herring. Like, I think I have a particular axe to grind with this because that's always the response in terms of young people and debt and financial issues. Like, oh, they're just not financially literate. Like, they are. They just, like, I don't think the issue is a lack of literacy or understanding, it's poverty. So I wonder if this is a kind of red herring for another problem, that the issue isn't literacy, it's something kind of different. Like maybe it's neoliberalism, or
maybe it's patriarchy.
Yeah, possibly. Just putting it out there.
Capitalism. Yeah, of course. Maybe it's white supremacist, capitalist, patriarchal ideology. Maybe. Adriana.
Yeah, my brain was just like enjoying all of this, so thank you. I think one of the things that stood out, and I think I would just be curious as to like, I guess how your analysis develops around this, because when you talked about how some filters wouldn't really translate onto like the participants that were Chinese or Thai, it made me think of a lot of my friends in grad school were from China, and their phones had embedded filters. So they would just open the camera and it came with like filters for your skin and all that sort of stuff. And when they took photos of me and they'd send them to me, I like had really round eyes and I looked even whiter, and I'm already very white. And I was just like, oh, like what's happening here? And I think for them, it was like, oh, like you'll look prettier this way and it'll like shape your face as well. And I felt like it just made me look even more Anglo than I already do. So yeah, it was just interesting seeing how it's working in the Australian context, I guess. And I'm excited to see what else comes up. Yeah, and how it fits, I guess, with wider, or like how other countries are looking at, or if they're not looking at this, but yeah, just curious about that. And yeah, I was also going to ask if you were going to use like body work, but you spoke a bit on that.
Yeah, thanks, Adriana. That's one of the things that this, like when we wrote the grant application or the proposal, it seemed like most of the tools or editing capacities, you had to buy a separate app to do it. Facetune and FaceApp, came out, I guess, in 2018 or 17, and were really the ways to do it. Whereas now phones come with these tools built into them, so you don't actually have to buy an app. You don't have to sort of deliberately opt in that way. It just comes as standard with lots of the AI tools that are in kind of more recent phones. So that's a challenge for our project. We were conceptualizing it as being like a separate app, like a thing, but now it's just your phone camera. So, but you can't do the structural editing with your phone camera. You can just, it's the racialized and gendered filters on your face, but those things are different. Yeah.
Clearly, I had no idea of this, and I'm going to have to run away and do it as soon as we stop talking.
Yeah.
I'll play with it. Sorry, Steve.
I was wondering about people's perceived audience and whether they spoke about who they imagined was going to be seeing these. And you said something about the saleable image, and I wonder whether it went into sort of self as a commodity, self as an enterprise,
Definitely,
and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, for many participants, it was really just around friends and wanting to be seen as in idealized ways just by broader social networks, whereas others had followings of like tens of thousands and were deliberately cultivating a following on TikTok or other places because they were really trying to become an influencer because they had an enterprise kind of in mind, like they had a product they were going to be hoping to launch in a couple of years, so they're building their base. So that's much more normalized as well. The whole thing about influencer culture is that it is available or seen as attainable to commodify the self in that way. It works. They see it. Lots of them have friends who are very successful in that, and others are very sort of deliberately not wanting to engage in that, but it's just it's just an available thing at the moment.
Were any of them doing influencer-esque, like, monetizing their social media presence?
I don't know if they're monetizing it yet. They had friends who were. One participant I'm thinking of, Grace, she had like 40,000 TikTok followers and had like the odd post that would go like get millions.
Yeah.
Not that she was monetizing it yet. I mean, she has a full-time job.
Yeah.
As like an astrophysicist. Pretty amazing.
Yeah, wow.
So it's their side hustle.
That's
I know.
yeah.
Well, I'm conscious of the time. But yeah, I guess I'll just finish and say thank you for being here. It's been a really nice small group. So thanks for listening. And yeah, Adriana, please send me your abstract and we will see hopefully all of you and more again in a few weeks' time.
Well, thank you, Julia, so much for organising this and organising the whole series, and for starting us off. That was really great, and it's a wonderful initiative. And I noticed you're branding it college, which makes sense, especially at Ourimbah. So that's great. Just pleased to see it happening.
Great. Thanks so much, Nancy, and thanks everyone. I'll see you
Thank
soon.
you.
Bye.
Bye.